So I've noticed something weird in the way people talk about South Park. I feel like every time I reminisce about the show with people, I end up having the same conversation. I'll say, for instance, hey, remember Underpants Gnomes? And everyone does right away. They remember the gnomes, they remember the song, they remember Tweak drinking coffee. They'll remember the whole episode right down to how Kenny died that week. Then I'll ask, do you remember the speech at the end about how people need to stop resisting the corporatization of their local economies?
Underpants Gnomes?
Big corporations are good.
What? This? Good?
Because without big corporations, we wouldn't have things like cars and computers and canned soup. Even Harbucks Coffee started off as a small little business, but because it made such great coffee, and because they ran their business so well, they managed to grow and grow until it became the corporate powerhouse it is today. And that is why we should all let Harbucks stay.
And they're like, what? That doesn't sound right. And I'm like, yeah, actually, that's what the whole episode was about. Don't you remember Harbucks Coffee, the stand-in for Starbucks? They're trying to open a shop in South Park that might put Tweak's dad out of business, and the lesson at the end is that that's a good thing because they have better coffee. And then I get some response like, well, they probably just thought that would be funny. I don't think they meant to say anything political. So what's going on here? I've heard people say for years that South Park isn't political, or at least that it didn't used to be, and honestly, I've never understood that perspective. If you look at Matt Stone and Trey Parker's writing style, it's actually very morality-driven. Episodes frequently end with an explicit moral, where one character stands up in front of a crowd to explain the lesson to the audience. This has happened so many times that they started making self-aware jokes about it on the show. And people seem kind of selective about noticing these. Like, nobody ever argues that the episode about Stan's gay dog or the one about conversion therapy weren't trying to make a point. Probably because most people who grew up on South Park would stand by those lessons today. But if you ask them what sexual harassment Panda was about, they think it was just about mascots or something.
Kyle, let me explain something to you.
Oh, God, here we go.
You see, Kyle, we live in a liberal democratic society, and Democrats make sexual harassment laws. These laws tell us what we can and can't say in the workplace, and what we can and can't do in the workplace.
Isn't that fascism?
No, because we don't call it fascism. Do you understand?
Do you?
All I could see was the millions of dollars coming to me, and I didn't care about where the money came from. Well, I'm no longer doing sexual harassment lawsuits in schools. They're too vague and too easily corruptible. Thank you, sexual harassment panda!
Let's talk about one of the most famous episodes of South Park. Team America World Police. I mean, it might as well be part of the series. So Team America ends with this monologue that's been bouncing around in my head for a lot of years now. Mostly because it's hilarious. The iconic dicks, pussies, and assholes speech. As funny as I've always found it though, I've had these gnawing thoughts for a while that there's something kind of fucked up with this line of reasoning. So let's lay it out. Gary posits that there are three kinds of people. Dicks, pussies, and assholes. Team America, the movie's stand-in for American military power, are the dicks. Gary tells us that although dicks are arrogant, reckless, and prone to mistakes, they're ultimately necessary because they fuck assholes. Assholes being terrorists and hostile foreign leaders. Pussies are represented by the Film Actors Guild, tastefully referred to in the movie as FAG. This group is made up of a number of real-life actors who opposed the war in Iraq, so we could take them as a stand-in for the anti-war movement. They're portrayed as cluelessly naive idealists who start off denouncing Team America, then eventually escalate to working against them by helping Kim Jong-il. Gary lays this out memorably.
But sometimes pussies get so full of shit that they become assholes themselves. Because pussies are only an inch and a half away from assholes.
The conclusion is that despite Team America's flaws, the pussies need to stand aside because the dicks are the only ones who can save the world. Now, you don't need to be a professor of media literacy to see that this is a pro-war argument. There is this one line that seems like it's trying to throw a bone to centrism.
The problem with dicks is that sometimes they fuck too much, or fuck when it isn't appropriate.
Yes, Gary, yes.
And it takes a pussy to show him that.
But that comes off a little hollow given the actual events of the film in which the anti-war movement sides with terrorists. I'm reminded of the South Park episode about the war in Iraq.
Yeah, if it weren't for all you guys protesting, well, everyone around the world would hate the American people instead of just the president.
And if it weren't for you people flexing your arms, America could easily get taken over by terrorists or China.
Again, we have an argument that attempts to seem even-handed. But if you think about it for more than like a second, it's arguing that wars of aggression are necessary to protect us from existential threats to our country, while the anti-war movement is only politically useful because of the necessity for war. There seems to be this conceit in both arguments that, although it's okay to be against the war is still necessary, so you should stop worrying about it. Getting back to dicks, pussies, and assholes, I realized recently that this is essentially the same argument I've heard somewhere else.
There are three types of people in this world. Sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Now, some people prefer to believe that evil doesn't exist in the world. And that if ever darkened their doorstep, they wouldn't know how to protect themselves. Those are the sheep. And then you got predators. They use violence to prey on the weak. They're the wolves. And then there are those who've been blessed with the gift of aggression and the overpowering need to protect the flock. These men are the rare breed that live to confront the wolf. They are the sheepdog.
The sheepdog analogy didn't originate in American Sniper. It's actually a common refrain in American pro-police, pro-military rhetoric, popularized by police trainer David Grossman, who even wrote a children's book about sheepdogs. Oh, isn't that sweet? And both versions lead to the same conclusion, that there's a class of people, represented by the US military, who are driven to protect the weak at all costs. The pussies and sheep need to stop interfering and let the dicks and sheepdogs do their job. See, the power of these arguments is that they're not just arguments for why certain people have to be killed. They're also arguments for why certain people shouldn't be listened to. They're just too painfully naive to understand the necessity for violence. Because they're pussies. Or sheep. Take your pick. So it seems obvious to me that the dicks, pussies, and assholes speech is a pretty clear argument for military authoritarianism. Now for a complicated question. Do I really think that the writers of this film hold the fascist-adjacent views I've just described? Well, no. Not really. I don't think Matt Stone and Trey Parker put a great deal of thought into most of the morals they present in their work. A lot of it just feels like poorly thought out reactionary politics. The War on Terror brought a level of criticism and scrutiny to the US military that hadn't been seen in decades, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with that. I think to Stone and Parker, the message that people were being too critical probably seemed pretty innocuous and common sense. But that's kind of the problem, isn't it? This sort of intuitive reaction to defend US military policy wasn't based on any reality of what we were actually doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's based on an emotional reaction to seeing criticism of something you were raised to believe in. And ultimately, authoritarian movements do tend to have their roots in these kind of emotional, reactionary views. I've often heard South Park described as being contrarian. Let me use this dumb article from Screen Rant as an example. 15 South Park episodes that haven't aged well. At number 3 they've got Man Bear Pig for obvious reasons. In case anyone needs a reminder, that's the episode they did in response to the movie An Inconvenient Truth, in which Al Gore is trying to warn everyone about an imaginary monster. The recurring theme of South Park's ethos from about season 7 on was that if Hollywood was on board with something, Trey Parker and Matt Stone wanted you to know they were either against it or simply too cool for school. Unfortunately, as has become de rigueur for South Park, Man-Bear Pig and its attendant iconography were quickly embraced by the real-life climate denial community, which has made reruns more than a little awkward by association. So this article seems to be suggesting that they made the episode Man-Bear Pig simply to troll Hollywood and take Al Gore down a notch. Then, somehow, by sheer coincidence, climate change deniers started thinking the episode supported their view. Gee, how could they have gotten that idea? Why are people so unwilling to consider the possibility that Stone and Parker just didn't believe in climate change and wanted to mock the idea? I mean, that was a fairly common viewpoint in 2006. I'm not even saying this to criticize them. To their credit, they did an episode more recently that seemed to be sort of an apology for Man-Bear Pig. It's just weird how people excuse ideas they expressed pretty clearly by saying they just wanted to contradict Hollywood or something. That said, I do think there's some truth in the "they're just contrarians" argument. They've basically said as much in interviews.
We were both Python fans, and we were both sort of punk rockers, you know.
Right.
And we wanted to do a punk rock TV show. And when we were growing up, the way to be punk rock was to be really liberal, you know, because we grew up with Reagan in high school and all of that, you know. And but then we moved. The problem was we moved to L.A. and we did, you know, and then the only way to be punk rock in L.A. is to be a Republican, because it's the only way. You know, you're in a party. The only way is to be like, I think George Bush is awesome. Everyone's like, what? You know, just like, you know, and that really, I mean, it's amazing. And when we did Team America,
I've seen Trey do that before too.
yeah.
I don't think that's much of an excuse, though. Take the famous Death Camp of Tolerance episode. When Matt Stone and Trey Parker hear that a gay teacher won a discrimination lawsuit, they don't think, wow, that sucks that gay people are still being discriminated against in schools. No, they think, my god, gay people have so much power now. So the episode they decide to write is about a gay teacher who's extremely inappropriate but can't be fired because the school is afraid of looking prejudiced. So now other people are being punished for pointing out his behavior. Notice how well this lines up with current conservative propaganda around gay teachers. I don't think that's intentional on Stone and Parker's part, but I don't think it's a coincidence either. I think these portrayals both come from the same lazy, reactionary way of thinking. Is there any practical difference between being a contrarian and just being a reactionary? They hear that you're not allowed to discriminate professionally against a minority, and they leap to the conclusion that those people have all the power. And it's not like this is a one-off either. They frequently portray the LGBT community as this powerful group using their victim status to bully people and deflect criticism. Season 23 features an episode hand-wringing about trans women in sports, so nice to know they're jumping on board with that moral panic too. Modern South Park has changed a bit, but it's definitely still the same show. They don't make as many episodes with really explicit morals in them, although those still pop up occasionally. A lot of it just feels like old man overreactions to some innocuous new product. Yes, South Park, a lot of people do carry metal water bottles now. What biting social commentary. I was a little surprised by the episode about microtransactions in games.
Now hold on, Terrence and Philip. There's nothing wrong with promoting a mobile game.
But there's something very wrong with knowingly making it appeal to human weaknesses.
You didn't build a mobile game. You built an addiction machine.
Guess they've strayed a bit from their libertarian roots.
It wasn't the tobacco company's fault that we smoked. It was our fault, us. We should all take personal responsibility instead of letting fat fascists like him tell us what to do.
But really, doesn't South Park embody the kind of person who would justify global capitalism as it impoverishes rural America, then start moralizing when it affects their video games? Political correctness is a bigger theme of the show now than it's ever been. Stone and Parker seem really focused on the idea that everyone is offended by their jokes. That's how they like to frame it anyway. I guess this is how they see people like me. The thing is, I don't really have a problem with their jokes. I mean, take Cartman's iconic Jew jokes. I actually like most of these. To me, it usually feels pretty clear that Cartman is the one we're supposed to be laughing at for his ridiculous, bigoted views. Now, I'm not saying these jokes are above reproach. I think there's a valid conversation to be had about when and how jokes like this should be used. But that's not what I made this video to talk about. I don't care if they want to make jokes about school shootings or Bill Cosby. Those can be funny. But this show is not just a pile of jokes. There are lessons here that have clearly been written in with intention. I'm pretty tired of this cancel culture narrative we keep getting from the world's most successful comedians. You know, where they complain about not being allowed to say something when not only are they clearly allowed to say it, they're being amplified and rewarded for it. Seems like a narrative for out-of-touch celebrities who feel entitled to unambiguous praise at all times. I mean, Joe Rogan can host a show where he has long discussions with white supremacists and medical grifters. Then when people criticize Spotify for promoting it, all I hear about is how the left is trying to cancel comedians because they can't take a joke. At this point, even someone like Alex Jones will claim to be a satirist getting canceled when it suits him. Have we become so irony-poisoned as a society that we have to pretend nothing can ever be meant sincerely? Look, I like South Park. Even kind of love it at times. I grew up on it, and it probably affected the moral compass I have now. I could have easily written a video about all the good takes they've had over the years. But honestly, that's been done to death, and I'm kinda sick of seeing it. Stone and Parker like to portray their work as constantly under fire from PC culture, but in reality, most mainstream media tends to cover them pretty positively. I mean, just about every media piece I can find about them lavishes them with praise. Doesn't seem like they see it that way, though. They seem convinced that one of the most popular TV shows of all time is actually some kind of rebellious statement against the status quo. Lord knows how they can still feel that way at this point. I think this out-of-touch perspective is partly why their parody of Trump fell so flat in season 20. Matt Stone and Trey Parker have gone on record saying when they started making episodes about Trump, they thought he was a flash in the pan who would never be president. And it shows on South Park, where the joke kept being that everyone hated him and he must be trying to lose, even as he got more and more popular in real life. It seems like Stone and Parker can't grasp the idea that not all of America is like their insulated Hollywood bubble. But really, this isn't about Matt Stone and Trey Parker. It's about all of us. I heard once on a pretty good show that when an artist creates something, it belongs to society. And indeed, fictional worlds and characters can take on a life of their own, impacting the world more than their creators ever could. Ultimately, what they mean to society is more important than whatever a writer may have intended at some point. Stone and Parker have observed themselves that so many people seem to want to claim South Park for their own side, that sometimes liberals and conservatives will both compliment them on the same episodes, both seeing it as a takedown of the other. I've heard a lot of people do the same thing myself. But really, the take that I think is the dumbest is when people say South Park transcends politics. Yes, I get it. They make fun of both sides. It's really not as smart as people seem to think it is. Let's take Goobacks as an example. The episode where time travelers from a dystopian future are used as an allegory for immigration. Now, as we've come to expect from South Park, the episode mocks a liberal position and a conservative position. We've got a group of blue-collar workers angry about the loss of their jobs, and we've got Randy and Sharon, who preach tolerance but are really just taking advantage of the situation for cheap labor. The thing is, no matter how you choose to look at it, this is still portraying immigration as inherently bad. These guys might be portrayed as stupid and ignorant, but they're still facing a real problem. I mean, people have to be able to support themselves. Meanwhile, the liberal stand-ins are portrayed as either exploitative or cluelessly naive, indifferent to the struggles of working people. On top of that, this episode also traffics in a lot of the same white grievance, speak English kind of complaints you would hear on Breitbart. When Stan says this,
Look, it sucks that the immigrants' time is so crappy, but the cold hard truth is that if we let them all come back to our time, then it's just gonna make our time crappy too.
that's an extremely political statement, but the show treats it as a completely neutral observation about reality. The episode ends ambiguously, because of course it does. The writers had nothing meaningful to say about this. Immigration is treated as a problem without a solution, which is the exact attitude that leads us to have thousands of people in concentration camps at the border that we just don't talk about anymore. Within South Park, there can be no deeper questioning of why society is like this, why we force populations of workers to compete with each other for lower and lower wages in the eternal race to the bottom that is neoliberal capitalism. See, because of this philosophy, political discourse in South Park always has to fit neatly into the Overton window. This isn't transcending politics, it's wallowing in politics. We get a straw man representing the left and a straw man representing the right, with no capacity to recognize the conservative, status quo assumptions that inform both sides. And yet I've seen liberals praising the commentary of this episode. Because unfortunately, a lot of liberals will go along with every ignorant assumption of the right as long as they still get to call the rural poor stupid. If there has to be an argument over whether South Park belongs on the left or the right, politically, I honestly think the conservatives have a better case. The show's underlying ethos seems to be that America is fine the way it is, and those problems that do exist can't really be solved anyway, so you might as well shut up about it. So the morals of the show are always going to trend towards the status quo. At best, they're centrists. You can't just say it's progressive because they said it's okay to be gay or because they sometimes complain about businesses they don't like. Look, if you're a progressive person and you like South Park, that's fine. I'm not trying to take it away from you. It's okay to enjoy a show without agreeing with every moral or political message it's ever had. But what worries me is this desire to make everything we like or identify with fit our current political views. Movies like Team America are part of American history, and when we do mental gymnastics to pretend they're as clever as they seemed in 2004, we're just distorting our perception of the past to make ourselves feel better. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the writers are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives or just walking backwards into right-wing talking points through their own ignorance. You don't need to make excuses for Matt Stone and Trey Parker. They're not your friends. There's one more episode I want to talk about, and it's a newer one, because I think it's very representative of where the show is in the modern era. White People Renovating Houses, which aired about a year into the Trump administration. So in this episode, the Durka guys are mad about Google and Alexa because now they blame that for unemployment. So they decide to have a protest and it looks like this.
You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
This is of course a hilarious reference to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where white supremacists marched with tiki torches chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil!
So Randy is filming his TV show, White People Renovating Houses, and the march somehow interrupts him twice. This leads to Randy suing them for damages because I guess the idea is that this hurts white people's image, which is part of his brand. So later Randy offers to solve the problem by getting them new jobs replacing Alexas, sitting in people's houses and looking things up for them, playing music, etc.
It works the same and makes sure people don't lose their jobs. Jim Bob, what time is it?
Dude, it is 3:27.
This seems to work for most of them, but this one guy, Daryl, is angry because he finds it demeaning. So Randy goes off on him in a way that's actually pretty savage, while talking to him like he's an Alexa. This is kinda long, but I'm gonna show it anyway.
I ain't doing it! This job is degrading and menial! Well, what kind of job did you think you were gonna get? Hey, Daryl, what kind of job did you think you were gonna get? Something that was goddamn dignified! Hey, Daryl, sorry, but you did not go to college, so you have to take the jobs you can get. I'm sorry, I do not get that! Hey, Daryl! Hey, Daryl! What? Coal mining and truck driving are not exactly jobs of the future, so add Carrera subway tile to my fucking shopping list!
Nice take, guys. Very punk rock. Anyway, later Randy tries to reconcile with Daryl, and this happens.
I don't have to stand here and take this. I'm leaving.
Come on, Daryl. We all got jobs. We gotta try.
Nah, hell with you. This whole country's going to shit. Muslims trying to kill us, black people rioting, and Mexicans popping out babies. Pretty clear it's either them or us, so I say kill them all.
Is it just me, or does it feel like the only way Matt Stone and Trey Parker can even conceive of racism being a problem is by blaming it on poor, stupid people who can't get jobs because they were too dumb to go to college? Anyway, you may be wondering how the show is going to resolve all this, and the answer is that they don't. Randy goes to Daryl's house, and apparently the real reason he's mad is because he can't remove the wall between his living room and kitchen. Randy helps him with his show, and apparently it's a happy ending. I guess we're supposed to infer that now Daryl will be happy with his new job as an Alexa and won't want to kill all non-white people anymore, but it just kind of feels cowardly, doesn't it? How do you think this episode would have ended if this were the old show? My guess is that some character would give the unemployed guys a speech about personal responsibility and not blaming others, echoing Randy's point from earlier. It would have been ignorant and arrogant, and it would basically be making excuses for Nazis, but at least it would have been an ending. This kinda just feels like they chickened out because they know no one wants to hear their lectures anymore. Actually, a lot of modern South Park feels like that. They'll spend a whole episode or streaming special building up some real problem that's going on in the country, and then it'll just go, and then something silly happened that fixed everything. The end. So why do they insist on even talking about stuff like this? Well, maybe they're worried that outside of edgelord politics, they just don't have a lot to offer anymore. You know, that ending got me thinking about something else. Have you ever noticed that everyone in South Park owns a home? Nobody rents. Even the ostensibly poor and unemployed characters have their own houses. This is especially weird when you consider that rising home prices have been a theme on the show lately, and they seem to put all the blame on real estate agents and yuppies moving out of the city, as if the rental industry doesn't exist. Come to think of it, for all the episodes they love to do about economic issues, unemployment, gentrification, and so on, no one ever really suffers because of those things. In fact, I'd say the closest they've ever come to showing poverty in a sympathetic light with real consequences is when Officer Barbrady gets fired for shooting a kid. Gee, that seems selective. Also, every family seems to get by on a single income, or sometimes none at all. Cartman's mom, a former sex worker who hasn't had a job in at least a decade, never seems to have any material problems supporting her son. In that real estate episode, when she tries to get a job, claiming to not be able to afford her home anymore, and Eric bullies her into quitting, all that happens is they have to move into a smaller house that looks silly. But there's a reason for that, isn't there? When South Park shows you people who are angry about their lack of opportunity, they want you to see those people as stupid and entitled, and understand that everything that's happened to them is their own fault. Do you think Matt Stone and Trey Parker know how much it costs to go to college? Do you think they care? Or do you think they just like saying stuff like this because it makes them feel like they totally owned the poor? The same way they like to dismiss racism and sexual harassment as things that everyone is just being too sensitive about. It's easy to feel smart and right when all you do is defend the status quo in a world without consequences. South Park's legacy is complicated. Like a parental figure who you looked up to your whole life, then one day realized they have some really shitty ideas about the world. I don't want to forget the good things, but I can't look at it through rose-colored glasses anymore either. Ultimately, it's a show that comes from a pretty ignorant, privileged worldview. It was interesting to catch up with South Park for the sake of writing this video, but I don't think I'm gonna keep watching. It can be a funny show at times, but I can't really respect it as satire the way I used to. It just doesn't feel like they have anything meaningful left to say. Anyone else can do what they like, but if you do watch South Park, do me a favor. Don't take them seriously when they try to address real-world issues. Because odds are, these guys have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, I guess we learned our lesson. No, we didn't, dude. No, we didn't.
But now I realize that I almost let racism turn me into a racist.